This is available beyond us. So welcome now to the recording. Wonderful to have this documented for the records, and to have a welcome to our conversation series about hepatitis C. We begun with a big quick introduction and overview of the conversation series and had a beautiful opening with Kokumgeo. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. And of course, as I look across the screen and recognize names and look forward to meeting more people through our conversation, I know that we're coming in from sea to sea to sea. And so want to acknowledge that, that we're coming together across this country called Canada. Hopefully the reach of this conversation series may even be beyond the borders of what is now called Canada, and that we're mindful that in this beautiful territory where we live and work and play, that we have responsibilities to honor the traditional holders of the territories and to respectfully consider how we lead this space for those who will come after us. In the context of the feast series and this conversation, we really value your participation and your support of events such as this. We welcome you following us on Facebook, on Instagram, and we use Eventbrite as well to host our future events. The Feast Center has a host of resources that are open to the public, so please make sure to also visit us at feastcenter.mcmaster.ca. My name is Renee Mashing, and I have the honor of helping to facilitate the session today. My bloodlines are from Six Nations of the Grand River. I'm also Irish descent, and I was adopted as an infant and raised in a family of Eastern and Western European descent. My father was a first-generation Canadian, and I bring all of that context to the way that I walk and work and play in this world. I work with CAN, Communities, Alliances, and Networks, as Research Impact Leader, and I'm the co-director of the Feast Center with Dr. Randy Jackson. For today's conversation, each of our presenters will do a short presentation, and then I will have the chance to moderate a conversation between the three of them. We'll then open the floor to questions from the audience. Really encourage you to write your questions in the chat box. We're going to be watching that, and we'll do our best to address the questions during the question and answer period that's planned at the end of the event. Also appreciate that everybody's got their mics on mute. Thank you very much. If you want to react or raise a hand, that's wonderful as well. We'll be monitoring for that. I would like to encourage each of our panelists to introduce themselves, because you are amazing and fantastic and wonderful people who I have the privilege of getting to know already. I think it's best that you get to say who you are on your own terms. So Katrina, may I invite you to introduce yourself first.
Okay, Tanse. It's a beautiful day to have a conversation, and to be here today in front of all you wonderful people. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me on this panel. Truly appreciate, all the voices and everybody here. Gail, your words were just, so many lessons you gave when you explained what you said. It's beautiful to be Indigenous, and I appreciate our teachings, where we come from in our culture. So my name is Katrina Tahoe. My father comes from Sturgeon Lake First Nation, and my mom comes from Cowes First Nation. So I'm Full Plains Cree, come from Treaty 6 and Treaty 4 territory. But I like to say, as I live, work, and play on the original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, Anishinaabe, the homeland nation of the Métis, I pay respects to the ancestors of my land, and I reaffirm my relationship with them as I'm here, So that's my lineage, my background, my educational background. I have a master's in business administration. I specialize in Indigenous leadership and business, and I got that from my parents, is just to go all the way, to honor that treaty right that we have, to go all the way and honor my ancestors. I have 20 years of experience working with Indigenous communities, right from being a camp worker to building financial statements, to doing strategy, and now being able to work with CanHepC on their Indigenous process and being able to have these wonderful conversations. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you so much. Marina, can I invite you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, first of all, thanks so much, Renee and Will and all the other speakers that are here. It's such an honor and privilege to be here among you and take part in this conversation, which I think is one that's very close to my heart. I'm coming to you from Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, which we know is the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka First Nations, and as well as a number of other Indigenous groups have traditionally come to meet on these lands. And I've if you want to, I think it's only fair that I also share my background, which is typical of a newcomer to this land, which is that very mixed, originally actually born in New York City, of parents who come from French Canadian origin, but also Eastern European and Ukrainian origin. So a real mix. And I think I grew up in an environment that was quite different from most, I think, in a sort of a commune in the 70s in Montreal, which gave me a real appreciation for differences among people, the need to recognize diversity and take, and I think is really what inspired me to go along the path that I did, which was ultimately into medicine, and to care for people who are living with HIV and hepatitis C. And I'm privileged to have led the Canadian Co-Infection Cohort Study, which is a cohort now that's going on for almost going into its 16th year, which has recruited participants from right across the country, from all walks of life, who've really generously participated in sharing with us their stories, their data, their blood, their treatment histories, and has really allowed us to get a vision of what's happening in this country. And hopefully I can bring some of that to the conversation today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I don't think I knew you grew up on a commune. It's good to learn something new.
Something
Gail?
I give out in meetings, but I
It's definitely part of the context of working and partnering in Indigenous communities. It's good to know that relationship building part's important. Gail, can I ask you to introduce yourself, and then if you'd like to carry on and share your story with us today as you feel good, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Well, as I was introduced as Kokam Gale, I do enjoy that name because so many of these younger generation that I'm meeting across Canada are turning to me as their Kokam and being in this two-spirited um, Kokam role is so important to me because I speak a lot at conferences, and usually I ask the people at the conference what they want me to talk about, and I'll do that. But then I always ask for a bit of time at the end where I can say what's in my heart and what I need to say as supporting the very young generation. They're so tender, two-spirited that are coming up as trans. So I am originally from Treaty 2, but I live in the biggest reserve in Canada in Treaty 1, Winnipeg, Manitoba. But for me, I miss my home when I leave my home, and I don't see the violence that everybody sees on the news because it's really broadcasted in such a crazy way for them. Like they've never broadcast anything nice about Winnipeg. There's a lot of nice things that happen here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here talking if it was the murder capital. And I'm always out in public. And I was raised on a reserve called Little Saskatchewan. It is in Manitoba. It's not in Saskatchewan. I don't know why they called it Little Saskatchewan, but that's where I was raised in Manitoba. And my treaty is in the next reserve called Fairford. That's where my dad is from, so I'm treaty from there. And I was raised by my grandmother, my grandfather, my great grandfather. And there was no residential school, plus there was no Catholic church. So being raised there, I'm so grateful that the knowledge that I carry today, I didn't know what my grandmother was doing at the time, being raised in that traditional way, but allowing us to follow her as the things that she did and made no sense back then. But now as I get older, everything is just so bursting with this beautiful knowledge that she left for us. I mean, I'm the oldest of five, and but my siblings are passing me. They're older than I am. I don't know what's going on. I'm still out there dancing up a storm, dancing jingle dress. I've been dancing jingle well over 20 years. I think that's what's keeping me so up to date with my strength to go on, and they're all gray haired and crippling up, and it's, oh my God, come on. I'm quite I'm quite busy all the time, and I love what I do. So for my job, I've been with CAN actually. I don't I'm always putting CAN up in the air because if it wasn't for CAN, I wouldn't be able to speak the way I do today as being a public speaker, because Doris Pelche was the one who dragged me into CAN, that's Canadian Aboriginal Alliances Network. And when she used to drag me off to these conferences, I used to like hiding in a corner. Don't look at me, pretend I'm not here. Don't even say my name. Oh my goodness, I was so nervous back then. I was in this tiny, tight little shell that I didn't want anybody to know I existed. But I didn't know at that time how important it is that today I speak for the Two Spirit, and I fight every way for the Two Spirit, especially the young trans that are out there. I'll do anything because I'm at that age already. Like my skin is like an old crocodile, so you can throw whatever you want at me and it just bounces right off. It doesn't bother me one bit as long as I'm there speaking for the Two Spirit, the younger generation of the trans. They belong. Creator's the one who gifted us to be here. I don't know why society is so harsh on accepting people for who they are. They should be like taking care of the homelessness or the drug activity that's going on instead of like attacking the young two spirit that want to live. And I always say that being two spirit, that's a gift, a very special gift that's given to you by creator. It's up to the family to nurture and also protect this two spirit to be who they want to be. Let them live. There's a reason for them being put here on Mother Earth. And we're not any better than anybody else either. We're all equal in Creator's eyes, because that's the way I was raised. My grandmother always told us as siblings that que we kapa we gitinentes o ken. Kan sige siya man ito ito hugoban da zin here. She always told us all, don't ever try and act proud of yourself or in front of anybody. Creator sees everything you do. A really good reminder for us all that anything that we carry or do, Creator sees. We can fool people, so we think, but we can never fool Creator. Creator watches everything we do. So I guess that's a little bit of what I can talk about myself. So down to talking to what I experienced with this Hep C, which I think almost took my life back in the day, where I had to struggle. I had to fight lots to stay alive. Um, and even though I look healthy now, then at that time, I was like, you could actually see the bones through my skin. That's how harsh the medication was. I had no hair. Um, if it wasn't for my late mother, I wouldn't be here, because she's the one who really, really forced me to eat and drink, and I just wasn't up for that, because that treatment that I took was so, so harsh. It was ripping my insides apart, my spirit, everything. I was so down. And I wouldn't walk. I didn't want to go in public. I didn't want to be seen. It was horrible. And even being in a hospital where I felt I was ridiculed all the time, ignored, and being disrespected, I just didn't want to live. I didn't have the fight in me because of the treatment that I had, and laying in the emergency, where because I was never used to being called sir, him, and that really hurt, especially when I couldn't defend myself to say anything. Um, I was so sick that I couldn't even talk from this Hep C, and it was the liver that really that attacked me. Was the liver, and I don't know. just simply that, you know, being who I am as an Anishinaabe and trans, I think that took a big part in the medication part, especially in the emergency. Like I was in that what do you call that? The intensive care unit. I remember being in there, but I also went into a coma, and maybe I can share a little bit about what saved my life with that part of being in a coma was because I danced jingle. I had told a friend about my jingle dress. I said, I don't know why. So many people do not have faith in their dress. I said, you know, when we dance this jingle dress, there's a spirit in this dress. We're only the helper. We're carrying this dress. We wear it. But we have nothing to do with that healing. It's in that dress itself where we get the healing from. As for myself, I pray for myself when I wear this dress. Then I pray for everybody else. And that's just the way um, I've been taught through older women that I dance with from Treaty 3, where they always remind me to humble myself. And even though I was brought up to be humble, still you need that reminder. Level yourself off with Creator and Mother Earth. So I shared that story with a friend of how I said so many jingle dress dancers always come up to me giving me tobacco, giving me sweetgrass, whatever gift they want, to pray for their loved one that's in a hospital or having a hard time with their health. I said, why don't they just like, you know, they don't need to wear the dress. They can maybe wrap it up in a some kind of blanket of some sort, smudge it, pray for it, and go take it to where it's needed by this person that's ill or needs that healing from the dress. So what she remembered that story was I was in a coma because my family was ready to unplug me at that point where I was in a coma for so long. And my friend didn't wasn't ready to give up on me. And then she remembered that story, so she went to my place and got the jingle dress. And when you are in a coma, you do already travel lots. I did travel. I've seen so much that a lot of beautiful places I've seen, but also a lot of terrible places that I've seen. The real horrible, terrible places I did not want to remember. I remember them, but I just don't want to think about them because they were ugly. But the beautiful places that I've seen and been was taken to, I just love that I was able to travel in that way. So it's true. When people are in a coma, they do travel. They are there. They can hear you. So my friend went and got my jingle dress, and I could hear the jingles really far away. I remember hearing them, and I was just so excited and happy. I was trying to go towards them, but then they started fading away. I remember that so clearly, and I heard the voices. This is when she had brought that jingle dress to me because she said, I wasn't ready to give up on you. I needed to save you in some way that I can. I remembered your story when got your jingle dress. I put it by your bed when you were in that ICU. And then she said I left the room crying and I came back about 5, 10 minutes, ready to put your dress and take it away, take it back. And but then I looked at you because your my eyes were covered in Vaseline or whatever. She said I could see movement. I was so happy when I seen that movement, she said, and I started screaming for the doctors and nurses, she's coming back. And that's what it took. And then that's when I came out of that coma. I fought so hard to get out of there. But during that time of fighting is when I was facing so much. Oh, I don't even know how to label the treatment that I got in there. It was terrible. And one thing that I remember that I'd like to share is what happened is that they wanted me to pee and they were making me wear this adapter or whatever it's called that you pee through. And I couldn't pee and they were getting mad at me because I couldn't pee. And I kept telling them I was able to talk already at that point. I kept telling them, give me a warm cloth and I'll put it on my private. Give me something warm to drink and I'll pee. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't listen. So I started yelling in there in my language, Ojibwe. It kept saying, "Oh, does anybody understand me? Please come here." Because in the next bed, I remember somebody was laying in there. All they would do was just moan a little bit. Everybody would come running up to them. Do you need morphine? Do you need to have painkillers? And here I was laying in my bed half dead. They wouldn't even listen to me. They would just ignore me. And I was in so much excruciating pain. But finally, there was a healthcare aide that walked by and she understood my language. And then I asked her, I said, "Can you please go and get me a warm cloth and something hot to drink?" I said, "I know I'll be able to pee." And even her, she said, "I'm not allowed to do that because I don't work here." But she said, "You know what? I'll do it for you. I'll sneak it." So she did. She went and got a warm cloth, warm, hot tea, I think she brought. I drank that and I peed. But the nurses were so mean that she came in there yelling at me. "It's about time you pissed. We've been waiting for so long." She ripped that adapter out and I just fainted. That was that. It was so horrific. I remember that pain because that that's your private part, and that was horrific. Like, why in the hell would they do that? Something like that. And even though I tried to complain, they denied it. They denied it right through. And so when the doctor came, I gave him shit also about. I said I was treated so horrific here. I was treated so bad. I said, "If your mother was here," I said, "would you let her lay in her shit for 4 days like I did?" I said, "You know, that's terrible. It's horrible. Nobody wanted to clean me." He just slammed his book down. He said, "I don't have to listen to this." He walked out. And that was supposed to be my doctor. But I was so angry because, like, where was all the health care? Why didn't they take care of me the way they did everybody else? Why was I being treated like I was nobody? So when I came out of it, like, I fought hard. I kept exercising because I knew I had to get my blood flow going in order to get out of there. I just wanted to leave so bad. And at one point too, I even stole a spoon and tried to shove that down my throat so I'd stop breathing. I didn't want to live anymore. And this is the hospital. This is where you're supposed to be encouraged to live, fight to live. There was none of that. I felt none of that. I just felt like I was in the way. So, anyways, I kept fighting. I kept exercising. Finally I came out of there. And the doctor came up to me when I was leaving, says, "You know, I need to give you a hug. You're the first one who's ever danced out of this ward. There's two ways you leave from here. Either you're half dead or you're dead, and you're dancing out." So I truly believe in our cultural ways that our medicines work on our dress. So with the treatment that got me there, it was so awful. It was like radiation, or yeah, I guess I could call it radiation, where because it was so harsh, the first treatments that came out, and I'm talking in the 80s when I had my Hep C. And I went to the first treatment. Like I said, it took all my weight away. I just had bones sticking through my face, through my arms. Like, there was a baggy skin covering my bones. That's all it was, with no hair. And it worked. And then I was getting my health back, and I got the Hep C back again. So there was three different kind of treatments that I took throughout the years, and finally I just didn't want to do it anymore. I said, I just rather, I don't have the fight. I'm just gonna go. But then it was Dr. Kaida, um, who had given me a call and said, "We've been monitoring you. So knowing that you want to live, we're gonna try this pill that just came out on you." And that's what finally got rid of it. Well, I still have it, but it's undetectable. And through all those years of going through what I went through, I knew that because I had liver cirrhosis, that the doctor had told me that cancer will set in one day. So it did. And there's a tumor in my liver. But I carry on. That's not a priority to me. It's just there. It's something that creator will take away for me. So I don't take any Western medicines. I rely on our traditional medicines. And they don't even know what stage that cancer is it's in that tumor because they can't probe it. If they do, it'll just spread and I'm gone. And they can't operate it because I'll bleed to death and I'm gone. So I'm just like really stuck with what it is that they've given me. I do not claim this tumor. I never do. It's there, but it doesn't matter. It's not gonna stay with me. I know I'm gonna beat it. So with this traditional medicine is what I really rely on. That's keeping me alive. And not only that, every sacred item that creator has given me, I turn to every one of them. And I respect each and everything that creator has given me. I have my bundle, I have my dresses, and have ceremony, everything, you name it, I'm there, I do it, and I pray for myself, and not only for myself, but all our people. So, miigwech.
Ooh, oh, thank you so much, Gail, and thank you for fighting. Thank you for being here and for sharing. That was so personal yeah, I can't even imagine. So thankful that you're here with us today. And this is the important reason for this conversation, to learn more about and understand the context of hepatitis C. And so we really wanted to bring together many voices and perspectives. So Marina, turning to you to help to kind of give us a foundation in understanding what this virus is that has impacted so many people in so many ways. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Renee, and thanks, Gail, for sharing that. It's very, very powerful and disturbing, because I think some of these things are clearly still happening, and we'll get probably to talk more about that later in the conversation. But I was just going to start by giving an overview of hepatitis C. Maybe it's a bit basic at some levels, but happy to answer other questions that are more detailed later on. But I think there's some important features about hepatitis C. It's a virus, and it's a virus that actually only infects humans. So that makes it possible, in theory, if we could find everybody, offer them treatment, treat everyone, and cure them all, that we could actually eliminate this from the human population. But it's focusing on treatment, and I think Gail's story is really about that. It's far too simplistic, because it's just a tool, but it's in this piece of a whole bunch of other things that are going on. And so that's, I think, going to be the focus of what we're going to talk about later in terms of how we can better address that. But in short, hepatitis C attacks liver cells and causes liver damage. And it's spread most efficiently from blood to blood. So it goes hand in hand often with a lot of other viruses that are passed the same way, such as HIV in particular. And early on, we saw people would get infected with this virus by being exposed to blood, either through blood transfusions or through medical procedures, before we knew about this virus, what it was, how to screen for it, and how to eliminate it from the medical practice. But there's still countries in the world where people are being infected today because of bad medical practices and reuse of needles, for example, in medical settings. But in Canada, it's mostly currently being transmitted through injection drug use, but also by sharing equipment that's used to prepare drugs prior to injecting them, or snorting. So sharing equipment is one of the other ways that people are less familiar, but can also lead to being exposed to the virus. Sexual transmission is also possible, particularly among men who have sex with men. So it's both a question of numbers of partners potentially, but also the context in which sex is occurring, sometimes in the context of drug use. And mother to child transmission is also possible, much less than we see with HIV, but it does occur, and particularly does occur in women who are also infected with HIV. So no, mothers need to know that they have the virus because we can address it before they become pregnant. Most people who get infected with hepatitis C go on to develop chronic illness. And this causes various symptoms. I think the most severe symptoms are those that relate to how the virus damages the liver over time and causes scarring in the liver, which then can lead to cirrhosis, which is where the liver is really so scarred that it can't make its normal function. And this is what can lead to cancer, as well as Gail has told us about. But it also has associated with a lot of other symptoms that people don't really recognize. And I think early on, they say it's asymptomatic most of the time, but a lot of people, if you talk to them, they may say, no, there's, they find they're tired all the time, or difficulty concentrating, sort of brain fog, like we see with lots of viruses. It also can have effects on the neurologic system. So you can have pain, chronic pain, cardiovascular disease, so heart disease, diabetes. So it has a lot of other knock-on effects. So it's a virus that, although it affects the liver, is important elsewhere. About 20 to 25% of people can actually cure the virus on their own after they get infected. And these are called spontaneous clearances. And that's great. And in fact, what causes that is not clearly known. There's probably some genetic factors from host factors, that is, their immune systems differ. Maybe the virus also differs. And in fact, spontaneous clearance may occur more frequently amongst Indigenous peoples. It's been observed. So that's a good news side of things. But the bad news side of things is that even if people clear the virus, they can get infected again. Because it's like, even if you've been exposed to the virus, you don't get immune to the virus. And that's why we've had so much trouble developing a vaccine against hepatitis C, because it's not enough just to have immunity. You have to have like your cells able to get rid of the virus from the system. So that we're still struggling to get a vaccine, and probably will do so for many, many years to come. And it also means why it's sometimes difficult to diagnose somebody, because you can have an antibody in your blood that tells you you've been exposed to the virus, but it doesn't tell you if the virus is still around. And so you need to have two steps to get a diagnosis. One is the antibody step, and then the second step is the PCR test, or the RNA test. And that tells you if the virus is in the blood. And so because of those two steps, often what happens is somebody gets tested, they think they have hepatitis, and then they never get the second test. And then they don't know if they need treatment. And there's a big gap. And then, people go on and do whatever else they do in their life, and then they don't get picked up again until much later. And they may have already developed some damage because of that virus that's going on. So it's really important to try to reduce that time between, make a more efficient diagnosis to give people the opportunity to get to treatment. Because now, fortunately, good treatments exist. Unlike the terrible interferon ribavirin-based treatments that Gail unfortunately had to have at the beginning, which really made people seriously sick and didn't actually even work that well. Now it's almost as simple as taking an antibiotic. The treatments that exist, which are called direct acting antivirals, are 1 to 3 pills a day for 8 weeks or 12 weeks. And they have really few side effects and cure more than 95% of people. So it's like, it's pretty miraculous in terms of developing a treatment. And it's really the first chronic viral infection that we have in humans that can be cured. So it's pretty amazing. And when you get cured, you actually, the liver, which is really a remarkable organ, has a capacity to regenerate, rebuild, and can get healthy again. Not entirely healthy again, but much of the liver can, so you can reduce the scarring, reduce the risk of cirrhosis progressing, reduce the risk of cancer even. And so really it should be simple. It's like a no-brainer. Everyone should be treated, but we know that it's not that simple, right? So, first, it costs a lot of money, these treatments. So at the beginning, we really restricted them to who was sickest and who should get them first. Now they've become available right across the country here, not everywhere in the world, but they're still expensive, but the governments are largely paying for them. Though in some provinces, there's still co-payments, which can be a important barrier. But there's also this holdover of like the old treatments, and also people not feeling, either doctors not feeling somebody is worth being treated, or people not feeling they're worth being treated because they're so expensive. I think it's something that we don't talk about a lot, but it's really important. And then I already mentioned the the issue about diagnosis, the 2 stages. Then you have to link someone to get to the treatments, and then they have to take the treatments every day. So there's many steps in the process, and we've been doing this in the old way always. Come to this specialized clinic, fit into our hours from 8 to 4, navigate the system that doesn't actually make it easy for you. And so a lot of work that we've been doing now is really to try to reduce those steps, to simplify, meet people where they're at, because the treatment is simple. So we need to change our approach to getting it to people. And I think the other 2 points I'll make before closing is that we can't forget about prevention, because like I said, there's no vaccine. And like I said, you can get infected more than once. So we really have to also think about reducing the harms that are associated with drug use, exposure, empower people not to be put in a situation where they can get infected. Because if they don't have access to clean needles, then they have no choice. It's not like someone goes out to get infected. We need to make it, and this is a particular problem, for example, in prisons or in situations where there's a real stigma around using drugs. We need to really move to do better on the prevention side. And then finally, I think the point that Gail raised so eloquently is that cure doesn't mean that Hep C is gone for a lot of people. So it's something we want to achieve. It's a first step to making people feel and get better. But it's really only the beginning of the road to wellness and the road to recovery, because a lot of things don't go away. The stigma of having been infected may stay. The physical damage that was done by the virus can endure. The risk for having cancer can be there. And that's the emotional side of and harm that occurred along the route to getting to that treatment. It doesn't just go away because the virus goes away. And I think we have to remember that when we are engaging with people with hepatitis C. So I'll stop there because I know there's probably lots of other things that need to get said in this conversation, and happy to come back to any of that if anyone has questions.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing overview. And it really has been very exciting in joining in this work to learn more about hepatitis C and this idea that we can actually cure a chronic viral infection. And so, of course, important work that we're doing in Canada is in partnership with the Can Hep C network, which is leading a response in Canada to hepatitis C, is the development of roadmaps that will help to implement an action plan for the elimination of hepatitis C as a public health threat. And Katrina, you're leading our work for a national Indigenous roadmap. So love to hear more about what you're doing and how you see the work progressing.
Okay, thank you, Renee. My co-panelists, you guys are amazing presenters. I just got to say that, following both of you is just it's a hard thing. And coming into this conversation, I guess I'll just do it my own way, and how I would do it is just to have a conversation and tell a little bit story about how I ended up where I ended up. So I finished my master's at Simon Fraser University this summer, and just entering it. And I was really thinking, for me, I believe in creator. I believe in the Western world, the traditional world. I was blessed with both educations. My parents pushed me on both sides, to be raised in ceremony, but also acknowledging that education, is our new buffalo. And that's how we're going to change perspectives for our people. And that's my goal, is to change perspective for our people in Canada. So we don't have to go through and have stories like Gail. Like, those stories can end, because that's not the only one I've heard, of going through healthcare and encountering that kind of trauma. So coming into that, and coming into the role that I've come into, so with Can Hep C, I'm the National Indigenous Platform Coordinator. And how does that title scare me? You hear national and you think, so it's across Canada, right? This big role that you have, little person me, in my culture, in my traditional ways, we're called Scapio. We're just learning, we're in that learning stage. So to come in here, I always wondered, what am I going to do with all of the experience that I have? And the experience that I have is with Indigenous communities. So right from being raised in Indigenous communities to ceremony, to working with Indigenous communities, to studying them, to working with West Bank First Nation. So, I have all of this experience, and I'm so grateful that CanHubC chose me as their candidate. And coming in and learning about, the hepatitis C virus and what the goal is with Canada, so that it started with the World Health Organization, and they're like, okay, we're going to eliminate hepatitis C virus by 2030. And Canada's like, yes, let's do this. We have all of the tools available. You just heard from Marina. We have all the tools available, that we can eliminate this, but it coming back, so just creating the policy, the action plan. So Canada's like, yes, let's do this. So they created a blueprint, a Canada blueprint on how they're going to do this by 2030. So that was released in 2019. And it said, so this is what we're going to do is we're going to separate it out into regions. So we're going to separate it out to British Columbia. We're going to separate it out to the northern region, which is the UK, or the Yukon, and then Nunavut way up there. And then you have Quebec. We're going to give them their own regional map. And then you have the Atlantic region. You have Ontario, who's already released their blueprint on how they're going to reach their elimination goals of 2030. So they're the first ones out of the gate right now with their roadmap. And then you have the Prairie region. So you have all of these regions working on their roadmaps for elimination. They all have leads, they have partnerships. And so like the work that is progressing, it's coming together. We have doctors, there's such a good, CanHubC has such a good team, leaders, and they're coming together. But not only that, they're a research organization. That's one thing that I appreciate so much is CanHubC is a research organization and a teaching one. So combining that teaching, learning, new methods with the research that's there, that the data that is there already for Canada really creates strong quantitative and qualitative data for realistic goals, creating policies and actions plans because the information is there, whereas you're not outsourcing it. So CanHubC is just a really great leader in forefront for the HCV elimination goal for 2030. And one thing I really appreciate about CanHubC is realizing, so coming into it, so what they did is what Marina said is they established 5 priority populations that have the highest for HCV. So the first one is people who inject drugs. And then you have inmates, you have men who have sex with men, there's immigrants, newcomers that come from countries where there's high level of HCV and no testing coming in. And then you have Indigenous people. And so how my role evolved is, so there's 634 nations, communities of Indigenous people in Canada. We are the fastest growing population here. And they predict by 2050, like half of the population will be Indigenous people with some kind of Indigenous background. So thinking about that and thinking about these 5 priority populations, what they didn't realize is there's a lot of intersectionality of Indigenous people in these 5 priority populations. There's a high percentage in people who inject drugs, and inmates, and men who have sex with men, and then you have Indigenous people in their own. And they're like, okay, so how CanHubC really took a look at it, and we had the 2 leaders. So the National Indigenous Co-Chairs, one is sitting right there and leading the questions. Renee is one of them. That is my mentor right there. And then you have Dr. Alexandra King. These 2 ladies said, we need to look at this a different way. We need to acknowledge that Indigenous perspective in a different way. So CanHubC was like, okay, how do we do this? So they created the National Indigenous Peoples Roadmap. And so like the first thing they had to do was to hire a National Indigenous Platform Coordinator. So, and then they were telling me, we searched far and wide and, coming in here. So I really, coming in, and I just started in December and coming in and learning about it. And for me, my goal has always been to change perspective for Indigenous people. And I live in the prairies, I come from the prairies, but I also come from 2 worlds. So I come from 2 worlds where there's a lot of blood trauma. So blood trauma is intergenerational trauma. I always remind people is like, so I'm a first generation that's allowed to raise my kids. Like residential school just happened and we have all of this trauma, all these cycles that come out of residential schools, so we can't look at eliminating HCV or, hepatitis C virus in Indigenous communities from a disease perspective. That here's the tools, let's expect you to do it. If anything, you have to look at it from a wellness perspective and just understanding how Indigenous communities work. So you think about Indigenous communities and there's 634 of them, but in Indigenous communities, maybe 1/3 of the population is there. The rest of them are in urban centers. Gail said she's from one of the biggest reserves, which is Winnipeg. You know, you have Regina, you have Edmonton, you have Vancouver, you know, so you have these Indigenous areas where they really need to have that perspective, that Indigenous perspective of HCV elimination, you know, so to come into it. And one thing that I'm grateful for here in Canada, so I have the National Indigenous Peoples Roadmap. I get to meet with each region and provide support and provide guidance. They want to provide that Indigenous perspective in their roadmaps, but they're like, how do we do it? How do we do it? How do we include that? How do we connect with Indigenous communities? And I was like, well, how do you think you would? How would you like to do it? If you were to meet another organization, how would you introduce yourself? You know, I was like, so that's how you do it. So I provide support, I provide recommendations, I work with the team, I make sure it's connected, but at the same time, taking away from each one of them that there's inclusive of elders and that wellness, you know. So Dr. Alexandra King is what she says, we have to see it from a two-wide approach. You have to see it from the Western, and like Gail said too, you have to take in that Indigenous people, we have trauma. We have trauma and stigma coming from smallpox, starting from smallpox. You know, half of our population was eliminated, you know, and then going into like the healthcare industry and being in hospitals and stuff like that. We have a huge fear of working in, you know, hospitals and clinics and cures and, you know, interferon. You know, one thing they don't realize about Indigenous people is word of mouth is huge. We don't have books, we don't have stories, we tell stories and it stays here in our you know, in here. So when that interferon came out, and people they want to eliminate, they want health and wellness. And so that fear is there. And so being able to use this National Indigenous Roadmap and work with communities to help eliminate that fear and that stigma, that's probably my biggest goal. My biggest goal is because, you know what, like we look about this, like Canada looks at it to reduce medical costs down the road, right? That's why we're eliminating it. You know, like what HCV does is, you know, millions and billions of dollars down the road if we don't take a look at it and cure it now. How I'm looking at it right now is if we don't get diagnosis, if we don't fill those gaps, we're going to lose our elders. I'm going to lose my elders. I'm going to lose, you know, there's going to be a lot of pain in that in our communities, you know, and so we were already healing from a lot of things. So being able to work as a National Indigenous Platform Coordinator with CanHEP-C and try to spread this good word and get it to the communities and create this roadmap and work with every region to make sure there's good Indigenous inclusivity. I feel like, you know, it's a wonderful goal I'm on, and to be able to work with an organization that's so receptive. We wouldn't have got this 10 years ago. You know, but indigenization is happening across Canada, you know, where it needs, you know, and the Indigenous conversation needs to be part of it now. We are the fastest growing population. So for CanHEP-C to go through it, and I'll tell you how receptive they are is I just started in December and going out there, I presented at the annual meeting, and it's really intimidating, you know, going out there and presenting to PhDs and researchers and doctors, and, you know, they're doing all these wonderful, amazing, beautiful things, you know, and being out there and presenting, and for them to just be so humbled by what I had to say, because I realized like I got a PhD too, but Indigenous experience. So being able to share that with the organization and have them so amazing on the path, you know, and to start this journey just makes me feel really good about changing perspective and working with the healthcare industry and changing it. It needs to change, because like, I don't want to hear any more stories of, you know, we shouldn't hear any more stories like Gail's. There shouldn't be trauma stories like that. And sadly, you know, a lot of my family and a lot of my friends and that have similar stories to this day. So that's the work that I'm doing right now as in my role. Thank you guys for listening.
Wow, amazing. I love your energy, Katina. And I just want to note and acknowledge some of the comments that are coming in already, just with profound appreciation, Kokum, and love from your grandchildren, love from many of the people who are here on the call, and appreciation, Marina and Katina, both for your energy and for your presentations. And so I think it's just it's such a lovely space to come together in these, you know, the gift of our virtual opportunities to connect. So I wanted to have a chance to have all of you interact a little bit, or we wanted to have a chance for you to interact together. So a question to all of you as panelists, maybe Kokum, if you're there, I'm not sure, your video is off, which is a nice way to kind of have a break from seeing yourself online. But we want to talk a little bit more about that thread of stigma. and think about, both how does stigma impact access to treatment, and think about maybe about as well, how have we been able to address stigma? Are there any success stories that we want to share? And I'll open that up to all of you. I see your mics are all silent, so all of our panelists. So if any of you want to jump in
Hi.
first. Excellent.
Yeah. What I'd like to mention too is that well, I guess I could say I was excited, but not excited because I went there when I was sick again. I went to St. Boniface. It was my breathing this time. I couldn't. This just happened recently, where because I had the COVID, and
Mm,
the after effect of my breathing, I got really scared that I couldn't stop coughing. Then my breathing was just going out of whack. So I went to St. Boniface, and they have all my records there, like because that's the only place I'll go to, St. Boniface Hospital, if anything happens health-wise. So when I went there this time, I was in the room, and there was this trans that came to me, and she was taking such good care of me. I just loved that. I said, "Oh my God, it's about time." I said, "No, I don't care about this illness." I said, I feel so safe that you're here, and I feel so wonderful to see finally our people working. I said there needs to be more of us out here in the work field. I told her, and I said, thank you for coming to take care of me. And she was so wonderful. Like it felt so, I don't know how to put it, but I was so happy. I wasn't happy that I was sick. I was fighting for my life again, but to see to see a trans employed there, it was so beautiful to see. And she was so wonderful. Like it, I just thought I'd share that.
thank you. It's beautiful. Marina.
Yeah, I was wanted to share a bit of, a project that I was involved in a few years back now, but one of the things that we sort of started to realize really early on in the treatment era where we have good drugs is that there were a lot of health disparities being experienced by the Indigenous participants in our cohort. And so together with Margot Pierce, who is a postdoc, a CTN postdoc with me, and who had been working a lot with the CEDAR project, and Indigenous elders from the CEDAR project and others, we got together to carry out a project where we did 45 interviews with Indigenous people living with hepatitis C, and to listen to their stories and try to get their perceptions about recommendations about how we could do better, how we could decolonize hepatitis C care. And it came out in a paper, so it's worth, I can put it in the chat later. I think it's worth looking at if people are interested in it. But they came out with 3 themes, which I think are really important to share, because a lot of it speaks to how can we address some of these experiences that Gail has had. First of all, the first theme was that treatment providers really need to learn and come to understand and accept that colonization is a determinant of health and wellness among hepatitis C and affected Indigenous peoples. And that there's ongoing, I think, Katrina, you alerted to this about, the ongoing impact of the residential school experience about losing children. This is still impacting every day. And until the treatment providers understand that and recognize it, they can't come meet people at their level at all. The second thing was having safe attitudes that can create trust between people and the providers that are giving them care. And that opens up opportunities then for engagement in care. But until you have those safe spaces of safe attitudes, and we even heard from providers we also interviewed providers, and sadly we're shocked by some of the kind of pervasive attitudes that were there, and that I don't think they even really realized that they were saying what they're saying and how negative and impactful it could be. So we learned from that. But the third thing, and I think was really one where we can probably take and try to build on, was that this concept of building strong circles of care that can have the greatest potential to engage people. And that circles are like circles. So it's the relations, people's relations. I think you talked about this a lot, Gail, how important your mother was in helping you to get well. So the support from trusted family and friends and connections, peers, to support all along the pathway to wellness, from finding about a diagnosis, supporting someone when they get that diagnosis, and this supporting adherence with treatment, encouraging people to come forward to take treatment, to celebrate the successes that they have when they can get cured. Those things were really valued and really important. But also circles of like health and social services, and particularly the role of Indigenous-led organizations and elders and ceremony and sharing circles, talking circles. All of this so important in kind of encompassing the whole person, because it's not just the treatment. And it came out over and over again from all the interviews. And I think that was, for me, I learned so much through that project, and it's really sort of informed my thinking about what we need to do to collaborate and really co-design interventions with Indigenous partners so that we can really move forward to make a difference.
And just to add on to that, Marina, like I couldn't agree more when I was thinking about it. And I was like, so for Indigenous people, especially being in the hospitals and healthcare, like, we need to humanize them again. I don't know when we didn't become human, when we were dehumanized, and sometimes I feel like that's Canada's perception that they threw out of us in the media. You see all the statistics of Indigenous people as street workers, as, addictions, inmates, the labels that they've created for Indigenous people. And not only that, but I can understand to some extent that, working in the healthcare industry and working in hospitals, and you have so many Indigenous populations, high Indigenous populations in the city struggling with blood trauma, struggling with addiction, struggling with these ones. So, going into with these struggles, but then you have Canada saying, yes, those are the bad people of Canada, right? Dehumanizing us, right? So I was like, how do we humanize what they should, how healthcare looks at Indigenous people, because we're treated very badly, so thinking about that, I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's what's coming across Canada, so if we could have Indigenous diversity and equity inclusion in the healthcare industries, and these are lunch and learns, these are going out to communities, they're learning about Indigenous healing models and methods, like creating that respect, understanding our culture, our people, making us human again, that, what Canada is representing and what the people that are coming in with the trauma isn't Indigenous culture. And, we're trying to heal our people too. And not only that, transfer of learning, thinking of transfer of learning and respect, like it would be nice if we could have it for, the people working in the healthcare industry. Would you like to go to a sweat? Would you like to ceremony? Would you like to really understand our healing methods? Like we're two sovereign nations. We need to come together, but it's to respect our healing methods as well, like, because there's ways out there that medicine can't describe. There's miracles that happen in Indigenous communities, that can't be described. So to go out there and to latch onto that medicine and understand it, I think would really be good for them. Or even to have like Indigenous healers on site, to have those elders on site, to have that ceremony, like to really combine and collaborate, because I know that they're exhausted in the healthcare industry, especially after COVID. It's burnout, it's exhaustion, so like being able to utilize other healing sources. You have naturopaths out there, you have Indigenous healers out there, let's spread that out outside of Canada and really create good healing, to eliminate that stigma. And so I think.
The other thing I have asked also was, when I was there, if there was any kind of like to have a sharing circle happening, because there's not only one person that's infected by this, and in order to be so great, if we were to sit together, people that are infected. So because when I first found out, that was like, it was like my life was over. It's what I thought. And I had no support from nobody. I had no idea what I was getting into. So, like, for people like that, people that are just finding out, to talk to other people that have been through it would be so important, that, it'll give more of a faithful, like, faith in medicines that are out there, because they'll hear stories from people who have had it and what their journey was like. And so when I did ask at that time if there was any kind of support system happening, they just throw it in my face. Why don't you do it yourself? I'm like, I'm not the one who's getting paid here. Hello, do your job. Like, I think that would be so important to have a space like that where we can talk amongst each other what our experiences have been through with this Hep C, and allowing other people who are just newly diagnosed to come in and listen. And so they'll know at least a little bit about how different our stories are, how different the journeys can be with fighting for your life to stay alive, especially when it comes to this Hep C. And I have been sitting, I did sit in front of panels a few times at the Health Science Center where I felt like I was attacked by, like, what I experienced there as trying to survive the sepsis and also in that coma part. And what I noticed is that they brought in the nurses, the doctors, the healthcare field to come in and listen to our stories. I think there was 3 of us trans people that were on there, and they had no questions. So I don't know, because I noticed that in general population, so even some people approach me, say they don't know how to talk to me. They don't want to hurt my feelings. But I tell them, you can, I'm an open book. You can ask me anything you want. It wouldn't bother me. You want to know, I'll tell you if I do know the answer, but I don't have the answer for everything. And I don't know why we never got called back in to do more with these upcoming people that are going to be saving lives, to learn about who we really are as trans people, and also about all these Hep C and all the things that we've been through and experienced. So I think a lot more of that needs to happen. Even CAN should maybe open up a space where have a sharing circle, an open sharing circle across Canada with people who've had that experience of what I've went through, and also open it up for the ones that are newly diagnosed so they don't have to live in fear. We have no time to live in fear. We don't know how long we're here. So I just thought I'd say that a little bit. Miigwech.
Thank you. That's a very powerful place to jump jump from. I'm mindful I have some more questions for you, but I also want to know if there are any questions from people who have signed on with us, because time flies when you're talking with great people, and time is flying. So if anybody wanted to raise a hand or yeah, Martin, thank you. Welcome to hear from you.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm wondering if I should turn my camera on.
Whatever
I-
makes you happy, it'd be great. Yeah.
I guess I could show my face today. Hi, Cookum Gail. I'm one of Gail's.
I love you and I miss you.
And it's nice to see you too, Katrina. I just want to thank everyone for sharing. I'm a person too that has lived experience with hepatitis C. And like, I remember how scary that was for me. And I have a question for Marina and then also Katrina. But I guess my question to Marina is that, like, I remember when I was diagnosed, it was a really scary time because the treatment was being made available. They were like, we're sorry, we understand that you've tested positive, but there's not enough liver or damage done to your liver yet, so you're gonna have to wait. And that's what really scared me. And so they're like, well, we're going to keep an eye on it. The treatment is really expensive. We're talking about like thousands of dollars here. And so I had to go back every few months. And what they noticed was happening is that I was actually clearing the virus on my own. And so I had some confirmatory tests, and I actually ended up having it come back, but wasn't exposed to hepatitis C again. It was the same instance, it was the same strain, like it was from the same experience.
Yeah.
And so I remember being really highly stigmatized in the healthcare system about that, because they couldn't understand why it would come back, and they really thought there was only one way that it can come back. And like I had been sober at that time for like maybe over 2 years, so there was no way that I could have been reinfected with that. So with that being said, I think what happened was they kept stalling and kept stalling, and they were doing fiber scans and just showing like, oh, there's not enough damage done yet. But then I think pharmacare changed their rules, and they're like, anyone that's co-infected with HIV can receive the treatment. And then even then, it was going to take months for me to receive that treatment. And the best thing that that doctor could do at the time was to refer me to one of the top doctors here in Vancouver, Dr. Mark Hull. And he gave me the treatment right away. I was like, within a couple of weeks, I was taking the first pill, and I took the 1 pill a day for 12 weeks and was completely cleared.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question for Marina is, what is that accessibility like today? Are people having a hard time accessing that treatment? And like, what sort of barriers would be in place? Because, you know, there's so many intersections that an Indigenous person can face when accessing healthcare alone, never mind accessing this life-saving treatment and then adhering to it for the required amount of time, because it was really stressed to me at that time, the importance of adherence every day. And then my question for Kachina, who I believe is with CAN, lovely to see you. I just wanted to know, so I'm aware that CAN has a leadership council of Indigenous people that have lived and living experience with Hep C. So my question for you is, how is that council being engaged in CAN's Hep C work? And are they offering like any advisory support on the Hep C work happening with CAN?
Great. Thanks, Martin, for those questions. I mean, so you were experiencing that new diagnosis at a time when treatments were definitely in transition. And as I sort of alluded to when I gave the introduction about hepatitis C, one of the main reasons that treatment was actually restricted, the direct-acting antivirals, the treatments were restricted, was their cost initially. And that led to kind of uncomfortable situations, because looking purely at a kind of cost benefit reality, the payers, the provinces and the federal government decided that it makes more sense to treat people who have advanced liver disease, because they're likely to get sick faster and cause, and need healthcare sooner, and therefore it makes a lot of sense to treat those people first. And nobody would argue with that in terms of on the personal level, that makes sense. But there's a lot of people that didn't fall into that level who also would benefit from treatment for a variety of reasons. First of all, because who wants to run around with a virus that they know is causing damage to their liver and not be able to do anything about it when there is a good treatment out there that they know can cure them? And second, can't we prevent other people from getting infected by removing infections from people who are carrying them, even if they don't have any symptoms at the time? So there's lots of good reasons to treat everybody. But the finances initially didn't allow that. Over time, there's been negotiations with the 2 major pharmaceutical companies that are providing the treatments that we use most frequently today. And we don't know, actually, we're not even purview to what the real price that the payers are paying. The list price is still extraordinarily high. If you look at in my province in Quebec, the list price is about $20,000 per month of treatment. So if you're on the 3-month treatment, 12 weeks, that's $60,000. And if you're on the 8-week treatment, it's $40,000. We think that the real price that's being paid is somewhere more in the $10,000 to $12,000 range per treatment course. But that's still a lot. That's like, we're talking about a medication that we know costs almost nothing to make. If you look at what's happened in the rest of the world where generics have come into being, so places like India and South Africa, they've got and Egypt have got the price down to as little as $250 per treatment course. So that's still making a profit, but the generics are still making a profit. So we know that there's a huge money taking going on with respect to the pharmaceutical companies. And that's a whole other battle that we've tried to wage at an international level, and we didn't make that much progress. But suffice it to say, currently, at least in Canada, access should be pretty good, but it varies from province to province. So this is why the roadmaps are being developed in provincial jurisdictions, because the epidemiology differs a little bit in each province, but so does access to services and treatment. So in some provinces, it's 100% covered. It's covered for many Indigenous people will fall under the federal coverage, and it's covered 100% with no copayment. In my province, it's covered like any other drug. But it still requires special access. So a doctor still has to do a special form to get the request approved and then reimbursed to take place. So some people will have to pay a copay, which could be quite a lot of money. So it's 20% of the cost of the treatment. So you can do the calculation, but that's thousands of dollars. Or their insurance they have insurance and their insurance only pays part of it. So it's not free. So that means that there's still a barrier. And there's also these administrative barriers, which means you have to get approved and you have to wait for that approval. That's really come down in many places. Like Quebec, we can do it online and it's done within minutes. It's done. So the same day you could see someone and treat them, but that's not the case everywhere. So that's why this is how, what it's happening. I'm going to address the other question because I think Doris actually asked it, and it relates to something, Martin, you brought up, is how can hepatitis C kind of seem to disappear and then come back again without it being a reinfection? And that just speaks to the fact that we don't really understand the full biology of this virus. And we don't really monitor people early on in their infection well enough to know that that virus actually can go down below a level of maybe we can detect it, but then it can come back up because changes in the immune system happen or the virus happens. So it's totally consistent, your story, with a natural first infection that your body tried to fight off, but maybe was not able to fully control because of other aspects of your immune system. And we see this happening. We also see people clear their virus years after they have it for no reason. So and we don't talk about those very much, but it does happen. So there's these kind of things that we need to understand better, and maybe that'll help us understand how to make a vaccine. I think, Katrina, I'll turn it to you. I had some questions for you.
And so just thinking about the Indigenous platform, so my role is with CAN Hep C, but CAN is one of the partners, Powasisquan and Wanska. Those are the partners that work with CAN Hep C. So I work at the University of Saskatchewan right now, and I was really grateful and blessed to come into such a strong Indigenous platform. So they created a national Indigenous roadmap team structure with all of the partners. So you have the core planning group, which is that's like Sandy, Leo in there. There's Renee, Melissa. So you have the CAN partnerships in there, the Powasisquan, the Wanska, you have the advisory committee, and then you have the ad hoc support and the researchers. And this is just for CAN Hep C. So then I really get to utilize, like, that's where we met, was at a CAN conference, right? Being able to come out there and go to All Nations Trust and have the conversations and get that experience so that I can bring it home to CAN Hep C and it can work with the National Indigenous Roadmap. So what Renee and Alexandra and Carrie Lynn Lund, Carrie Lynn Lund is a cocoa of my heart that I just, never knew that I had out there until I found her. That woman just changed my perspective in my life, right? And as well as they send me out to elders conferences here where I'll be speaking at the elders conference. So like all of this beautiful Indigenous support and that, so that I can create a strong national Indigenous roadmap. It's amazing with all the partners.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Katrina. And I've answered a couple of questions in the chat as well. And so Martin just offered that insight about CAN, Communities, Alliances and Networks, and CAN Hep C, the Canadian Hepatitis C, the Canadian Network on Hepatitis C, and put web links for both of those in the chat, and really important to make sure that we are bringing forward the voices of living experience. So certainly that's an influence through contributions that we make to the CAN Hep C network. And I think it's work that CAN, Communities, Alliances and Networks, really wants to elevate and continue to make sure that that we're privileging the voice of lived experience as a priority and clear voice in the work that we're doing.
And just to add on to that, we do sharing circles of people with lived experience. So we really get that strong story, that intent and that emotion.
Thank you. Just Leila, we're following up an email already, but to acknowledge that in the work that we're doing with the national roadmaps, and with a prairie roadmap as well, that there will be opportunities to connect. We absolutely hearing directly from the front lines, from communities, from the people who are doing the work and who are concerned and interested in the work, that's what makes it worthwhile. But the intention of the big, especially with the national scope, is that we're not reaching out directly to individual First Nations. So we'll make sure that connection happens as well. And time has flown. I think I'm going to thank on the recording. I'm going to thank all of us for and just again really want to echo the feedback in the chat to say that this has just been a wonderful panel, and what you've shared and opened and begun a conversation that we're really looking forward to continuing. And in the context of the Feast Center for Indigenous STBBI research, this opportunity to really expand and understand the scope of what falls under the umbrella of STBBI is so critical for the way that we move forward. And I have to say, it's always very exciting for the nerd in me that when we come together as researchers and I actually get excited about research. So thank you so much. I'm going to ask for us to have a closing prayer, but also that we'll turn off the recording. And so that we won't have that recorded.